Hmm.
I think so. I'm ready to go.
All right, Charlie, would you do the honors of introducing Jenna this evening?
I do have the honor of introducing Secretary of State Jenna Griswold. She was elected in 2018, beating the incumbent Wayne Williams 53% to 45%. It's not her first rodeo, though. She was part of the Obama campaign in 2012 as a voter protection attorney, and so she had some experience in the kinds of issues that we've been reading so much about in the last year. And we had a flawless election here in 2020, so she's got a lot of good news to share with us, and I'm going to turn it over to Jenna.
Well, thank you. It's so nice to see everybody. I started to giggle for a second when I saw the rainbows over Perry. I hope everybody has rainbows over them and feeling good. But gosh, so much has happened since we won this seat. So, you know, we won really big in 2018. I became the first Democratic Secretary of State elected in Colorado in 60 years. The youngest Secretary of State in the nation, and just the 10th woman ever elected to statewide constitutional office since we were a territory. And we started big. I got all of my campaign promises done the first year. So in 2019, I was able to lead the largest democracy reform in the nation. And work with the legislature to get that through and into law. So we increased voting access, added more drop boxes, added more polling locations, guaranteed a voting center and drop box on all public universities and tribal lands. We ended up doing parolee reenfranchisement, automatic voter registration. We shined light on dark money, banned foreign money from coming into our elections, and did lobbyist reform. All with the idea that we need to put more power in the hands of everyday people so that we can have our voices heard in democracy. And so I thought 2019 was the big shebang. So we start 2020 with our first presidential primary in 20 years, first one ever in which unaffiliated voters can cast a ballot. We had great turnout, and a week later, I closed down the office. And then we started to see the effects of the pandemic on elections. Mid-April, Wisconsin had their election. And in Milwaukee alone, 180 polling locations were reduced to 5 because election judges were scared to go do their jobs. From that, there were hours and hours long lines, and over 70 people got sick from the polls from going to vote. And if that wasn't a wake up, then we saw Georgia. And if you remember some of the pictures out of Georgia in that primary, voters were standing in line in the rain for 12 hours. So that was a big, demonstration to the country that we had to act. So here in Colorado, I issued a series of emergency rules to make sure that our voting would be as safe as possible during the pandemic. We increased drop boxes to increase access. So in 2 years, we've increased drop boxes by 55% as I've been Secretary of State. So as Texas or Ohio are saying 1 drop box per county per millions of people, we now have 1 drop box per 9,200 people in Colorado. We increased voting centers to make sure people were spaced up. We had backup voting centers with the pandemic. We did other things like text to cure to make it easier to fix your signature if there's a signature discrepancy. We instituted statewide ballot tracks so every Coloradan could track their ballot, a whole host of things to get ready for this big election. But more than just that, I found myself as the only Democratic Secretary of State from a vote by mail state in the nation. And we had 2 problems last election, the pandemic, and also a president who was trying to undermine confidence and use the tools of the presidency to undermine vote by mail. So we ended up, unfortunately, having to sue the federal administration with our attorney general 2 times. We sued the Postal Service to not undermine our elections here or anywhere in the nation. And then I got to work. We started talking with any Secretary of State who would talk with us. Our elections division was sharing best practices and tips. And I'll tell you that we had fantastic elections in the face of really big hurdles. Here in Colorado, We saw more people vote in the middle of the pandemic than any election in our state's history. Coloradans were pumped up, and I'm really glad we increased that access. And one of the things that I didn't mention is I've been working with the tribes. We ran a series of laws to make sure that tribal voting was protected. And then I worked with them last year too. We saw a 20% increase approximately in tribal voting in 2 years. That's what having good laws and good engagement can do. And I'll tell you, coast to coast nationally, in just last year, we increased access to vote by mail to over 83% of American voters. That meant that voters across the country didn't have to risk their health to cast a ballot. We had the safest election in our nation's history, and record number of both Democrats and Republicans cast a ballot. So it's been a busy couple of years. This is a lesson of you never know what life is going to give you. You just have to be ready to go for it. I'm very proud of our office, very proud of Colorado. We are the nation's gold standard, and we've, just continued to innovate. Now, I know you all are watching the news and following things. We are seeing a national backlash against voting rights and voter access. Over 360 bills to suppress voters have been introduced into 47 state legislatures. We're able to stop some of the bills. So in Colorado, there were 6 bills to undo our vote by mail system. We stopped them, but they are passing. Places like Georgia, Iowa, Montana, they've already passed. They're about to pass in Florida, potentially in Texas and Michigan, Ohio. So the fight for voting rights, it continues. The fight for a democracy in which all voters, Republican, Democrat, and Independent alike, continues. I have been recently elected, it was on February 3rd, so a couple months ago, to be the chair of all the Democratic Secretaries of State. It's a great honor that my peer Secretaries of State have elected me to serve in this position. And what we're doing is trying to do everything we can to hold the line so that all voters can have their voices heard, just like Coloradans, but also really urging the Senate to pass H.R. 1, which is the For the People's Act, which implements or would put into federal law the reforms we have in Colorado so that truly all Americans could have the access that we have here. So it's been a busy couple of years. I really appreciate all of your support and happy to open it up for discussion and questions.
All right, I'll take it from here. Want me to start with some questions? Okay. Hi, Jenna. Oh, she's turned off again. She's back. Okay.
No, I'm here.
You're there. Okay. Rob Goldsmith with some questions on behalf. Is there any legislation from the current Colorado legislative session that ends in June that will affect the functioning of your office? You mentioned emergency orders, for example. Are any of these thoughtful things making their way into legislation? Anything that's pending out there that's going to be affecting your office? Thanks.
Yes, absolutely. So I'll try to tell you all by memory. I hope I don't forget any. So there were 6 bills that would have suppressed voters. We stopped those. We worked with the legislature and stopped those. There is a bill for ranked choice voting in municipal races. And how that works is that instead of picking one candidate, you would just rank the candidates. I like this person first, second, third, fourth. I'm pretty supportive of the idea of ranked choice voting. If I was drafting, maybe would have started in presidential primaries. If you guys recall, in the presidential primary, there were candidates dropping out during early voting. So some Coloradans voted and then their candidate stopped or dropped out. But neither here nor there, it's a good idea. The one issue that we're working through is the funding source. It's really expensive. And I don't want to have to raise fees on small business owners, especially now the small businesses are just having a rough time, dealing with the pandemic. So we're working through that. There's also the election cleanup bill. It's called the Colorado Votes Act. It's a bill that happens after every election to clean it up. It's really long. I think it's 84 pages. It's mostly just cleanup. There's a couple interesting things in there, including increasing online voter registration to be able to, so right now you need a Colorado driver's license to register online. So we want to expand that to social security numbers. So there's a couple really neat things in there. Gosh, I know I'm missing things. Okay, the big one doesn't directly affect us with the legislation, but there is a big issue in that the census data is delayed from the Census Bureau. So you guys know in 2018, Coloradans passed amendment Y and Z to do independent redistricting and reapportionment. Redistricting is the congressional seats. Reapportionment is your local state legislature, state house seats. So they need the census data to do this. The census data was supposed to be sent over mid-April. They're now saying mid-August. So there's a piece of legislation to try to keep all the dates on target. How this affects my office is that all the maps need to be done and sent over to us, blessed by the Colorado Supreme Court, by the end of December. And if we get them after January 3rd, it will affect the election, the primary election. Because as soon as those maps are done, the county clerks have 1 month to draw precincts across the state. They are 1,500 people wide, I should say. They're composed of 1,500 people. Then you go into signature collection for candidates and other measures. Then you go into the county caucuses. Then you go into the primary. So it's just like this tick, 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 really fast, back to back election calendar. So we're really monitoring that and seeing what we can do with that. There's a host of other bills. I think those are the major ones. We do have potentially a late bill to combat foreign influence in Colorado politics. So I'll keep you up to date on that. But it was a pretty busy session.
Great, thank you. Susan Stewart posted, please congratulate Jenna on the professional way that she represents Colorado on MSNBC, whatever that is. I don't know what that is. Oh wait, I see it. I see it in the lodge all the time on those exercycles. And a question from Charlie King. I thought that the vote tracker was fantastic. Does Jenna have any feedback about how it was implemented and how many voters actually used it?
Oh gosh, the ballot track. So it was already live in 12 counties, and then Denver uses a different system. So we expanded it across the state. It worked really well. So it was just a great tool. I cannot remember off the top of my head the percentage. It was really high. I could follow up with you on the percentage of Coloradans who used it. So basically, if you sign up for ballot tracks, you can see when your ballot is mailed to you, when it's received by your county clerk, and when it's processed. So it just adds, if you can track a pizza coming from Domino's or a package coming from Amazon, why shouldn't you be able to track your ballot? And it adds more transparency. So that's one of the things one of the innovations with COVID, we just said, hey, we want more transparency. Let's set this up. We also set up a program called Text to Cure. So, when you vote a mail ballot, your signature is being verified. And in Colorado, anytime you vote your mail ballot, it goes into our signature bank. Anytime you interact with the DMV, we're getting that signature. So as you get older, you get more and more signatures on. But younger people have less signatures in our signature bank. But also say someone has a medical condition like a stroke, your signature may change. So we want to get your most recent signature and just have a bunch of different signatures to do that comparison. So we did a bit of digging last year. We have the lowest rate of throwing out ballots, not counting ballots if signatures don't match in the nation. However, there's a big discrepancy for younger people because younger people may have one signature, no signatures on file. So the rate at which we have to not count their ballots is much higher. So we rolled out a new innovation. It's called Text to Cure, where you literally can just verify your signature using your smartphone. Over 11,000 people use that. Those are 11,000 votes we otherwise wouldn't have been able to count. So that was another one of our big innovations last year. From a cost perspective, considering they're statewide, they're pretty affordable, and I thought they worked really well.
Excellent.
Oh, Rob?
Yes.
Rob, yeah, I'm just going to jump in
There you are.
and ask a quick question based on what Jenna was telling us.
Sure.
You said that there were 6 bills introduced in the Colorado legislature that would somehow restrict access to for voting. What was the rationale for introducing those bills? What was the thinking?
Yeah. So some of the things that the bills would have done include forcing us and your county clerks to throw out bills not counted by election night, or ballots, excuse me, not counted by election night. So 84% of election ballots were counted by election night 2020, but it's about 25 to 10% of ballots that are not counted by election night. We'd have to throw those out. Some of the bills would have required you to go show proof of citizenship in person to your county clerk to make sure your ballot was counted. It would have undone vote by mail for all, where we just send a mail ballot to every registered voter. And we're seeing it across the nation. We are seeing these voter suppression bills making it harder to use mail ballots, decreasing drop boxes, targeting Black voters, criminalizing the act of giving someone a glass of water when they literally have to stand in 8 to 12 hour lines in places like Georgia. We're also seeing an audit happening in Arizona. It's a sham audit by an inexperienced company. And it's all really spreading the big lie about 2020. And that's the lie that there was something wrong and that Donald Trump should have won. It's not based in reality. There have been bipartisan actors at the federal level, at the state level. There's been judges appointed by President Trump who all say the election was free, fair, and secure. So it's this premise of undermining confidence with the intention of passing voter suppression. And voter suppression bills are passed for politicians to keep power. That's what they are. So it's unfortunately the blatant attempt by some conservative partisan elected officials to tilt future elections in their favor. I just think it's reprehensible, it's undemocratic, it's un-American. And we have to do everything we can to make sure that all eligible people have access to exercising our constitutional rights.
Thank you.
Of course.
We have time for one more, or how are we doing on the schedule here, Andy?
Yeah, I think we have time for one or even 2 more.
Okay. Jenna, you mentioned the Democrat secretaries of state.
Yep.
Is there still a national association of where both parties, I mean, is there a schism now reflective of the greater political landscape, or do you still able to work together with other Republican and independent, whatever, secretaries of state and do projects together?
Yeah, so the answer to those questions, the 3 questions and 3 answers of yes. So there is a National Association of Secretaries of State, and they are great Republicans. So for example, last year I did an op-ed with the Secretary of State of Washington. She's a Republican. We did actually with that Secretary of State and Michael Steele, the former chair of the RNC. We did events about vote by mail. I just led a bipartisan letter urging the Department of Homeland Security to continue their efforts to counter foreign disinformation. They did a really good job last year, led by Republicans. We just did a bipartisan letter urging them to continue. However, at the same time, the amount of partisanship and really, just the spreading of the big lie to suppress voters has affected some Republican secretaries of state. It is more noticeable than it was in the past. You do have Republican secretaries of state going to stop the steal events. Those are, events saying that the election was stolen from the former president. We wanted during the election, if you guys were seeing what was happening in Georgia, that the former president was pressuring the Secretary of State, Republican Secretary of State, by the way, to find the votes for him to win. He was facing immense pressure. The Democrats asked the Republican secretaries of state to join us in putting out a bipartisan letter of support, statements of support. The Republicans refused. So you are seeing a more, partisan nature, unfortunately, and I just think it's a shame for the country. Because what I believe is not that we should set up laws to help Democrats win. We should set up laws so that American voters get to choose who wins. And if it's a Republican who has a better message and a better plan, great. If it's a Democrat, great. But we should allow that to be decided by the voters. We are seeing folks on the other side straight out say that they're trying to suppress voters. We've seen that. So, you know, we just have to keep on pushing for the ideals of our democracy and the ideals that voters get to choose the American president, their senators, their House members, and their local representatives.
That's the questions I have, Andy. She's a superstar. Thank you, Jenna. I shouldn't say this stuff. Sorry.
Our plan is to have some additional time after all of the presentations, but I want to ask this question now. The same question I'll ask of everyone. Are you seeking re-election in 2022?
I am, yeah. So we are gearing up for re-election. Secretary of State is a hard race. Like I said, I was the first Democrat to win in 60 years. Eisenhower was the president the last time we won this seat prior to the win in 2018. I just think, you know, we have made a difference. We have made a difference. Here in Colorado, you just have to look at some of the results I just shared with you all. But across the nation also, and at a time when democracy is under attack, we are the beacon of hope of what can be. So absolutely running for re-election. I'm excited to run with my friends Dave and Phil, and I'm excited to win this race again. It will be hard, just like the first time was, but nothing worthwhile is easy, as they say, Andy.
Well, thank you, Jenna. Thank you very much. And I know we all second what Rob just said, that you have been a superstar for the benefit of Colorado voters. So thank you. Thank you so very much.
Of course.
Our next presenter this evening is Dave Young. When Dave Young was elected to the Colorado Treasurer's Office in 2018, we knew that Dave would safeguard taxpayer dollars, wisely invest them, and put them to good use, thereby making sure that they would benefit all of us who call Colorado home. Because of the American Rescue Plan Act recently passed by the US Congress, Dave is working with Governor Polis and the Colorado legislature to make sure that the nearly $4 billion coming to Colorado will be allocated fairly and effectively throughout the state. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Dave Young, our state treasurer for tonight's Colorado conversation. Dave, welcome to the Democrats at Anthem Ranch meeting.
Thank you, Andy. It's great to see so many of you again. And I know there's some new faces in the crowd I haven't seen before, so I'll take a moment to introduce myself here in a bit, but it's also great to see some of you I've seen over and over again at all kinds of events, both at Anthem Ranch and other places. So thank you for being so active. I appreciate that. That's what keeps our democracy strong. And what a tough act to follow. Jenna Griswold, right? she is a superstar. The only thing that's better about this list is that at least the other superstar, Phil Weiser, I get to go before him. So that helps me a little bit. But I did prepare a slide deck. I'm going to share that. You know, I'm a former educator, so I got to have a handout, and a slide deck is about as close as I get to handout. So with your permission, I'm going to gear that up here. I'm hoping I'm hitting the right one.
Something's coming.
Can you see that?
Yes.
So
Yes.
the first
Yes.
job is to determine whether the real me or the picture of me is better. Okay, don't answer that. I'm going to move on. But for those of you that don't know me, I just want to be sure you understand. I mentioned I was an educator, not only K-12, taught at junior high up in Greeley for almost 25 years. We still live in Greeley, about a block from that school. But I also taught at the downtown Denver campus of CU in a master's program. I taught people how to teach online for about a decade.
Wow.
Higher ed and K-12 and corporate trainers. So We've gotten a dose of that in the pandemic, haven't we? I always liked this line. My sister got me into politics. My sister is actually intellectually and developmentally disabled, and many, many years ago was struggling to get the services that she needed literally to survive. And my wife, who's a school psychologist, and oh, by the way, is now the state representative for the Greeley-Evans House District 50 seat up in Greeley. She and I worked together to try to navigate the Medicaid system to get my sister the kinds of support and services that she needed to move forward in life. And it was a real struggle. And somewhere along the line, I've been fighting this from the outside long enough, and the opportunity became open for me to jump in as a state representative. And I had never thought about running for a political office really before, but I thought I'm going to try fighting this from the inside. And so in 2011, I came in as a state representative. About halfway through the process, the last 4 years I was in office, I realized funding was the problem, and I asked to be on the Joint Budget Committee for the last 4 years. Somewhere along the line, somebody said, well, now that you've been on the Joint Budget Committee for 4 years, you must know everything there is to know about the finances of the state of Colorado. Why don't you consider running for state treasurer? So I did a deep dive into that. Really discovered that this was a good fit for my skills and also my goals, and was lucky enough to, with your support, to go through the election in 2018 and came in with Jenna and Phil and Jared Polis and Diane Primavera as your 5 statewide elected constitutional officers. So you can see the boards that I'm on. I'm going to touch on each of those as we move forward. Let me just put in the plug right here. Here's my contact information. I always want to be sure that people know that they can get in touch with me. So that Google Voice number works. You see my email address in the middle. That's my political email. I typically start that way. I get something in my political inbox. If it turns out that it's really specifically Treasury and not political, I'll move it to my Treasury email address and interact with people that way. But I build a pretty big firewall between political and state activity, because I don't want that firewall to be breached. So I start on the political side, and if it moves to the Treasury side, that's great. I might mention that in answer to the question, I am running for re-election. I am, as you'll see, very passionate about the things that we've been able to get done in the Treasury. Love the work. I wouldn't run for re-election if I wasn't thoroughly enjoying it. But we know this election cycle is going to be a tough cycle. And so we're actively building the campaign now. And as a matter of fact, on Thursday, May 13th, Congressman Ed Perlmutter and Congressman Jason Crow, who are supporting my re-election campaign, are going to join me on a virtual event. And I think Perry has put something.
Yep. Dave.
Yeah.
Yes. Up. If you go to your chat at 7:27, I put up the link to the May 13th Zoom meeting, and I will also send it out to our members after our meeting as well.
Great. So
and Jenna just put one up. Jenna just put one up as well.
Yeah, we're all working it.
And the chat, her 7:31, another Zoom meeting right there on May 11th.
And so, you know, I appreciate Ed and Jason coming on to support my reelection campaign, and it'd be great to hear the work they're doing. I'm very active at the national level, and I've worked a lot with both of them. And so I'm really excited that they're going to be able to come on to that event as well. So just wanted to put that out there. You're going to, I think Andy and Perry said that they're going to send out a copy of this deck to everybody. So you'll get it. These links are active in the PDF, and you can click them and go to where you need to go. So let me move on. I want to give an overview of the Treasury very quickly. There's a lot of content on each of these slides. I'm not going to talk about every single thing that's on there, because you'll get a copy of the deck and you'll be able to look through. But I want you to have a sense of what really goes on here. I manage the state's complex checkbook. And you go, well, how hard is that? Well, think about all the different departments and agencies that we have that are conducting transactions at any given time. And we have to make sure that there's enough money in our accounts to cover all the obligations for those transactions. But in this low interest rate environment, you cannot actually leave money in the bank and expect to get much return on investment. So we have an active investment portfolio, very conservative, but we actively manage it. And the good news is that throughout the pandemic, we've been working remotely, and your money is safe, and we're beating the benchmarks on our investments. And so we're really excited about that. It's been a challenging time, but I think it's gone really, really well. And again, I'm so pleased and appreciative of the hard work of our very smaller staff. I mean, I'm not talking about height, I'm talking about the number. Many treasuries across the country who do the similar kinds of work that we do have staffs 5 to 10 times the size of ours here in the state of Colorado. So the taxpayers are getting a whale of a deal, and we're doing a great job. I'll talk about some of these programs. I want to highlight unclaimed property as well, because it's about consumer protection. And that's certainly something we do in the Treasury. But Andy had talked about the American Rescue Plan. And for those of you that had a chance to participate, he mentioned that the governor and I and legislative leaders across the state conducted a listening tour. We did it the first 2 weeks of April, because we've got these one-time monies coming in, not only the almost $4 billion for the state government specifically, but also another $2.3 billion for local governments, a total coming into individuals and other entities in the state approaching $27 billion under this Rescue Plan Act. Our state's budget is $30 billion. So this money is really significant that's coming in, and we want to be sure that we effectively utilize it. So you can go to the website, Build Back Stronger Colorado. You could see the video recording, the Zoom recording of 19 different sessions. I don't know, you'd want to actually look at all 19, but you might want to look at one just to get a flavor of what happened there. You can also click this link when you get the slide deck and access the slides that were available for those sessions, so you can get a flavor of the specifics of the Rescue Plan Act. Your legislature is going to begin to put bills together to appropriate this money that's coming in 2 tranches, half now and half later. And, I'm actively working with the governor's office and with legislators as they begin to develop these bills. What makes it difficult is it's one-time funding. So you can't spend it on programs. You can't hire people, because as soon as the one-time funding ends, then there's no money left in our budget to support ongoing salary and benefits for these employees. So we have to be smart and strategic about the way we invest these dollars. And that's the work that we're doing now. So connect with your legislators as they begin to develop bills and introduce bills to appropriate the money, and watch closely, because this is a really big deal. I can come back and talk more about that if you want to hear about it. But let me move on quickly. Unclaimed property. How many of you have checked your unclaimed property? How many of you have gone to the Great Colorado Payback? Well, I can't really see all the hands, but I see some waving. It turns out that about 1 out of 10 people in the country have unclaimed property and aren't even aware of it. In the last calendar year, you could see we returned a record $47 million in unclaimed property. We hold over $1 billion. $1.3 billion in unclaimed property. So we're anxious to get this back to people. There's the link to go to the Great Colorado Payback. But I'll mention to you, I said I was active at the national level. The National Association of State Treasurers has one division called NAUPA, N-A-U-P-A, the National Association of Unclaimed Property Administrators. And this year, I'm the president of that. So I represent every treasurer across the country that is utilizing unclaimed property services to try to help them do a better job, and very active with Congress as we try to work with even the U.S. Treasury to get money back to people as well. And so there's some national websites as well that we run through NAPA, unclaimed.org and missingmoney.com. And what's interesting is you should check not only for yourself and for your friends and family and colleagues that you may work with, but you should also check for nonprofits and faith-based community organizations and all kinds of different organizations you may work with. They may have money that's in a treasury, and it may not be in the Colorado Treasury. It may be somewhere else. You may have lived in another state. Go check out the states that you've lived in to see what's there. And so I always put that plug in because there's a lot of missing money out there and we're really serious about getting this back to people. Work very intensely to try to make sure we get it back. I can come back and talk about that some more, but let me move on. Another facet of the work we do in the Treasury is around debt management. And in this low interest rate environment, we've been really, really busy. So we issued a year ago a $500 million tranche of transportation funding. And we are about to do later this month another 500 million. And it's not just transportation. We're working with higher ed. We worked with CSU and the National Western Complex to help them. We do work with the BEST program, Building Excellent Schools Today. And we also do short-term borrowing. I run a program in the Treasury that's an interest-free loan program for our K-12 school districts who struggle with cash flow early in the school year in September through December because a lot of their money comes in from property tax around this time of the year. So they need some support, and we provide that through that kind of work as well. I'm going to keep moving because I'm on a time schedule here. Just want to make mention of this. This is a property tax deferral program for seniors and active military. I'm not talking about the senior homestead exemption. This is a property tax deferral, not an exemption, but I just mention it because I'm not sure how aware people are of this. It basically, they file an application with their treasurer, Kim Pfeiffer in Broomfield, but it depends on what county they're in, and you can see the dates there. The state treasury then pays the county for those property taxes, and it's essentially a loan on the property that the owner can pay back, or later, if they want, their estate can pay back. We base the interest rate each year. It's adjusted based on the interest rate of the 10-year treasury. So right now it's a pretty good deal, but it's not the right program for everybody. The senior lobby approached me a year ago and said, hey, we don't think that this is being broadcast very widely, and we'd like to make sure more seniors are aware of it. And I thought, well, that'd be great. We should do that, but we should also make sure we've got a streamlined and efficient process in the Treasury and support our county treasurers across the state, all 64 of them, to make sure we don't overwhelm people if we have a real heightened increase in this. So we're working on this right now. I'm having meetings with county treasurers and commissioners all across the state to figure out a better and more efficient way to work this program. But I just wanted you to be aware of it. If you don't hear from me, you'll hear it from members of the senior lobby. And like I said, it's not the best program but for everybody, but it might be right for certain people. In this pandemic, we know, and Jenna had mentioned this as well, that there's small businesses have really been hit hard. And we're really worried, even though there's been a lot of federal money that's come in, that there was not, for the really smaller sized businesses, it was really difficult for them to get the kind of financial support that they needed to make it through the pandemic. And so coming out of the 2020 session, we worked through a bill and got it passed. And over the last 8 months, have put together a statewide loan program of $250 million in working capital loans that are going to be available over the next 2 years. And we are launching this now. So that website, climber-colorado.com, is where lenders and small businesses are going, and we're matching them up through the website so that we can get this money flowing to them. There's an oversight board that set all the policies together, but the idea here is we don't want to be in competition with the Energize Gap Fund or the federal PPP program, but we want to fill the spaces that those other programs don't fill and catalyze loans that wouldn't necessarily have been done otherwise. So real excited about that. Chaffa is our loan program manager. Here's a few more details. We're by statute required to distribute across all 64 counties. We're looking at businesses from 5 to 99 employees, including nonprofits. So you can get a sense of this thing. We're really trying to make a working capital available to stand our economy back up again. And we know as a state, if we can get our economy fired up quicker rather than later, then we do a lot better as a state. That didn't happen in the Great Recession in 2009 and 8 and 9 and 10. we didn't quite get the flow of capital coming back out as quickly, and we had a protracted recovery as a result of it. So we're trying to really step up and be proactive here. Another issue that we've been addressing head on, and it's one that I really am sensitive to after being on the Joint Budget Committee, we have over 900,000 private sector employees that don't have access to a retirement savings program at work. We have PARA for the dedicated public servants to provide them retirement security, but we have almost 1 million employees here in the state of Colorado on the private side that aren't saving for retirement. And as a result, they're going to be highly dependent only on Social Security. And I think we all can agree that that's probably not the pathway to a dignified and sustainable retirement. We all deserve a dignified and sustainable retirement. As a matter of fact, we put some numbers to this. If we don't do something about this, we did a really deep study in this in 2019. We discovered that either people are not going to be able to retire when they thought, they're going to have to work longer, or if they physically can't continue to work, they're going to end up having to rely on safety net services, which are, oh, by the way, funded by taxpayer dollars. And what's the amount of money? It's going to be a $10 billion hit to our state's budget over the next 15 years. Oh my goodness. I sat on the Joint Budget Committee for 4 years. We don't have that kind of capacity in our budget to withstand that kind of a hit. And so we knew we needed to do something. We ran a bill in 2020. We're standing up a program. It's going to take about another 18 months to fully launch it. It's patterned after successful programs just like it, auto enrollment IRA programs in Oregon, Illinois, and California. And so we're well on our way. We're working on this. Again, I can come back and talk more about it, but I'm going to just let you know, this is why I'm so excited to run for re-election, because I'm really passionate about these initiatives that we're working on, and this is a great one right here. I know nobody on this call really cares about PARA, though. I'm listening to all the laughing. I know you do. I'm a PARA retiree, as you saw in a previous slide, and you know that I'm one of the 16 trustees of the PARA board as well. I always qualify my statements on PARA by saying I am not the spokesperson for PARA. Okay, Marcus Pinnell, the current chair of the board, and Ron Baker, the current executive director of PARA, are the chosen spokespersons. But as treasurer, I have an obligation to talk about PARA. I just want you to know that my statements and opinions are mine as treasurer, and don't necessarily always reflect everything that PARA would issue in a statement. But I'm working really diligently to work cooperatively with the staff and the trustees to move PARA forward, because we want a sustainable PARA. It's important. I also always remind people that that the PARA board meetings are open and available. It used to be that it was pretty hard to call in. You had to come down to the office where the board meetings were conducted, but in this remote time of Zoom, we're all learning that we can actually do this pretty easily. And so you can actually zoom in on the PARA meetings, and there's the link. But let me just say, PARA is solvent. In 2019, a 20.3% return on our portfolio. We don't have the final numbers yet for 2020. Those won't be available for another month until the June PARA board meeting, but I think we're going to be solid again. And a part of that is because we've worked to come up with an auto adjust program to get PARA back on a glide path to sustainability. And we've got a really great staff that's working to manage that portfolio to make sure it's successful. But in the downturn, you know, the JBC had to really cut budgets, $3.3 billion cut in 2020. And they looked pretty long and hard at PARA and actually reacted, I think, in a very appropriate way. There were a lot of cuts on the table, and they decided they were just going to not put the direct deposit, $225 million direct deposit in, but avoided all the other cuts, because they know every time they make a cut, it's just going to cost us more down the road to get PARA back on a sustainable path. So they've now funded the direct deposit in this year's budget, plus some. I don't know what they're going to do with the additional amounts, but we'll see. So I think there's a lot of good work being done. Why is that important? I do debt management. Our solvency in PARA actually affects our credit rating as a state. And, our credit rating goes down, then we pay more in interest. So I really pay attention to this, not just because I want a sustainable retirement for our public servants, because it affects all taxpayers positively if we get PARA on a good pathway. There was a divestment bill that was run to ask PARA to divest from all fossil fuels. That bill didn't go forward, but the whole concept behind institutional investors leveraging their portfolio to make substantive changes in national policy or international policy is coming more and more and more. Did you know with this PARA portfolio, the PARA took 66,000 proxy votes of its shares in the year ending the 2020 year that ended June 30th? I had a PARA member tell me, hey, wait a minute, I don't remember PARA ever sending me an email asking me how I wanted them to vote for one of those proxy votes. And I said to her, do you really want to get 66,000 emails in your inbox? And she went, oh, well, maybe not, but I mean, there's a lot of active work being done, and I'm very involved in working with the PARA board to set our proxy voting policies so that we can actually get a sustainable portfolio moving forward. And I always throw this, if you're a math teacher and a treasurer, you have to have a graph, right? I have to have a graph. So let me just throw this in here. This is a graph that comes from a nonpartisan document from our Ledge Council, nonpartisan staff at the Capitol, and it was produced in 2010, showing the funding ratio for PARA over a long period of time. And notice way back there in 1970, PARA was sitting at about 60% funding level, which is, we're a little more than that now, but it's kind of similar. But look at that glide path going all the way from 1970 up to the year 2000. A 30-year period, we went from 60% funded to 105% funded, which is where we're trying to get again. There was some bad decision making that was made, in my estimation, in the year 2000 that caused that big drop right after that. Of course, 2 recessions, the tech bubble that burst, the dot bomb, and also the Great Recession certainly didn't help, but there was also some poor decision making that resulted in about a $30 billion loss to PARA's portfolio that should have never happened. And so I'm dedicated to making sure we make smart decisions. We've done it before. We did a 30-year glide path from 1970 to the year 2000 to go from 60% to over 100%. We can do it again, and I'm dedicated to that. So let me stop there. That's the last slide. I'll entertain questions. I think what I'll do is just stop the sharing of the screen so we can all see each other again, and let me answer some questions.
Hey, Rob,
Yeah.
we've got time for probably 2 or 3 questions, and I see about 3 that were put in our chat box that I think Dave would like to answer. I think the people who asked them would like to have them answered too.
Sure.
Okay, so 2 or 3 quick questions. Similar to your characterization, Dave, of the health of PARA, this is really hard. You talked about 20 billion plus of one-time money coming to the state, which I guess you could consider general fund or whatever. If we could peel that away and just ask for your view on the health of the state's finances, on a continuing basis, if we can peel away the one-time money, how are we doing?
Well, first, let me just clarify, because I threw out a lot of numbers and probably threw out too many and made it confusing. But the state money is that amount that Andy had referred to earlier, which is almost $4 billion. The over 20 billion, the 27 billion I mentioned is, some of that includes those stimulus checks that went directly to individuals. So it's coming through a lot of different pathways to the state, either the state government itself, local governments, or individuals, small businesses. It's a real mixed bag, but it's a total of 27 billion. But if you strip all that away, we are not, I don't think we are healthy financially as a state. We have some serious work to do. We have to reform Tabor. I'll give you an example. Only the voters, by the way, can reform Tabor. So I always say, let's work together to develop a rational tax policy that actually makes sense, paint a picture of what we want Colorado to look like in the future, and then talk about how we can get there through a rational tax policy. We are the only state in the nation that does not have a rainy day fund. The only state. Now we have reserves, we have cash funds that we can sweep, but you know, a rainy day fund actually has statutory guardrails, because what you learn when you go through a recession is the first year is bad, but so is the second and the third year. Sometimes they're even worse, and maybe even the fourth year. And if you take all of your reserves without control and begin to solve the budgetary problems in the first year of a recession, you have nothing left to deal with that problem in year 2, 3, and 4. So a rainy day fund puts guardrails of how much can actually be expended in each year, so that there's some budgetary discipline, and you don't find yourself, you know, cutting the slats out from underneath people who really need these essential services. Why don't we have a rainy day fund? Because in the Constitution, Tabor says whenever there's a surplus, that has to be refunded to the taxpayers. Now, I like refunds too. You know, who doesn't like a refund? But when you aren't able to deliver on the essential service, I'm not talking about the nice to do things. I'm talking about the essential services, like I talked about with my sister. We've got 3,000 people here with significant disabilities who haven't for decades have a place to live. Not like just during the pandemic. For decades, we have people with disabilities that don't have a place to live. I mean, that's not meeting our fundamental promise of essential services to people. And, you know, when we have excesses in revenue, we ought to be storing those up so that we can bolster up those services and be prepared for when there's a downturn, so we don't leave people like people with disabilities there without any support systems. So there's one example, and we don't have enough hours. I can get going on this. We have the least competitive salaries for educators in the country if it's adjusted for cost of living. We have 3,000 vacant teaching positions in the state of Colorado that we can't fill. I mean, what are we doing here? We have one of the hottest economies in the country, if not the world, but we're starving our state government, and it's not delivering on its promise. So yeah, it's an unequivocal answer for me. We've got to do something significant and thoughtful to move ourselves forward as a state, or else we're just going to fall short in the future.
Okay.
Well, Andy, that answered about 5 questions that we had. And
We did. Yeah.
Speaking of superstars, thank you, Dave.
I was going to say very quickly, you all will have these slides, and Dave, if some of the questions that people think of afterwards or didn't get answered, they can send it to your email. Is that correct?
Absolutely. You bet. I'd be more than happy to receive them and respond to you. So a lot of information, not much known about the Treasury. So as people dig in, then a lot of questions come in. So I apologize. I may have run over a little bit, Phil. Sorry about that.
No, I think we're fine. And
Okay.
I'm going to borrow something from, oh gosh, I can't think of it now. Anyway, we're in good hands. We're in good hands with
Thank
you,
you,
Dave.
Very good. Well, thank you.
Thank you so much for a very informative presentation. I know we all learned a lot.
I'm going to stay on because Phil's my attorney.
Okay.
I want to hear what he's doing over there.
All right.
I love his work. I want to hear more.
All right. Linda King, would you please introduce Phil this evening?
Be happy to. Okay. It is my pleasure and privilege this evening to introduce Phil Weiser, our state's 39th Attorney General. As Attorney General, Phil has committed himself to protecting the people of Colorado and building a collaborative organization that will address a range of statewide challenges, from the pandemic, wildfires, and opioid epidemic, to reforming our criminal justice system and protecting our land, air, and water. Phil has dedicated his life to the law, justice, and public service. He is truly the people's lawyer. It is my honor to introduce Phil Weiser. Phil?
So I don't have a PowerPoint, but I do have a picture, which I guess I'm going to put into the chat if it will let me here. Let me see if I can put it into the chat here. All right, it's not letting me put, if I share it with someone, will they be able to do it? Can I share a screen here? Let me see if I can share a screen here. Can people
There it
see
is.
my picture?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So I'm glad, does anyone here know the significance of that picture?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Jedi-
I'd love to have a ringer with me.
Jedi warrior.
Jedi Warrior, I love that. Very close.
Tomorrow,
Dave Young, say he knew.
tomorrow is May the 4th.
Tomorrow's May the 4th.
That's
So,
right.
On
May the
May the
4th.
4th, it's traditional. If you're a Star Wars fan or otherwise a geek or a nerd, either is acceptable, to say, May the 4th be with you. And so to all of you, I say, May the 4th be with you. And I want to start a little
Phil,
bit.
did I know that because I'm both a geek and a nerd?
You and me both, buddy.
Alrighty, buddy.
Right back at you. How lucky are we to have Dave Young as treasurer? I mean, you don't get pure heart, soul, and intellect in Dave Young. And what's also powerful about Dave is how many of his former students have come to bat and believe in him. And I do want to put in a word for teachers as elected officials, because I also was a teacher at CU Law School for 20 years. And what I have found is being able to explain ideas like Dave did so well about Tabor and the idea of a rainy day fund. That's what we need in our political leaders. And what we need, back to May the 4th, is we need more light in a world where there's too much darkness. We need people to believe in a better future in a world where there's too much cynicism. And we need collaboration where there's too much division. And part of what binds us as citizens is a commitment to our Constitution, to the rule of law, and the conception of working together towards a more perfect union. In our office, we have a true north, which is together we serve the people of Colorado, we advance the rule of law, we protect our democracy, and promote justice for all. I want to talk about that commitment along three different dimensions. First, how we protect people. Second, how we improve our criminal justice system. And third, how we protect our land, air, and water. And most importantly, because there is not a more engaged group of citizens in the state than in Anthem Ranch. And Linda, you introduced me so kindly. You embody that. I know Andy and everyone else here does as well. It's not the same not being with you. I remember being with you, and I don't know if we've got Claudia here in the audience, but Claudia used to work with me, and she lives there and came by afterwards, and it was very meaningful. You are extraordinary. So I want you to understand a little bit what I'm doing, and then you can share it with others. So first, what does it mean to protect people? Well, first it means protecting our democracy and the rule of law. The basic rights that we count on as citizens has been under assault, and the culmination of that assault was January 6th. I'm still healing from January 6th. I was scared because our republic saw an attack on our institutions of democracy itself. And there are a lot of people who basically say we're entitled to live under a democratic republic because we've had one for 230 years. There's a great book called When Democracies Die. And the short version is when people allow their democratic institutions to be degraded, election processes to be undermined, voting rights to be deprived, we can lose a democracy. And over the last year, we saw that. And I was proud to represent Colorado, to defend the rule of law, and to stand up against baseless actions like the Texas Attorney General tried to do undoing an election. And now we're in a period of having to heal and continue to stand up for our rights as citizens, our civil rights, our equal rights, and rights as a consumer. Because just as Texas would run roughshod over the rule of law and fair elections, there are companies that would run roughshod over your rights as a consumer, who would take advantage of people who might not be paying attention every month what's on their credit card, or who might be telling them, I'm going to give you an FDA approved treatment during this pandemic that isn't FDA approved, or who might be raising fees after they told them they wouldn't. And so we're continuing to look after the people of Colorado. Stop Fraud Colorado is there to protect you, particularly older Coloradans who are more vulnerable because they're more trusting. We've got a partnership with ARP Elder Watch. You all can help get out the word. Go to stopfraudcolorado.gov and you can see lots of good guidelines, information to help you help others so that you're not subject to these frauds that are out there. Number two, our criminal justice system. We just got through a trial that many of us had been holding our breath, because the rule of law says if you are a lawless actor, whoever you are, you need to be held to account. Derek Chauvin murdered George Floyd. We watched the video, we knew it happened, but we asked, would our justice system deliver justice? And part of what we have to do together is to work to make the system fairer and to make it more committed to supporting public safety. And those two go hand in hand. I'm going to testify on Thursday for a bill that comes out of a painful story, but turns towards a positive purpose. The painful story is Charles Battle, walking home, top of his class, high school senior, and someone is the victim of a crime and says, I think the person who did it was wearing a gray hoodie. Young African-American male. Can you find him? The police see Charles wearing a black hoodie, and they go ahead and arrest him anyway. Bring him to the victim and says, is the person? And she says, sure, this looks like the person. And he spends 72 hours in jail. Takes 6 months before the charges get dropped. He misses his high school graduation, goes through trauma. Now, the happy ending of the story is Charles and his mom, Sharon, don't stop. They push for reforming what was then used in Denver called a show-up procedure. We now also developed guidelines on proper witness identification. Well, Denver wasn't following our guidelines. Afterwards, they spoke to the chief of Denver, who said, we're going to do better. We're going to follow the Department of Law's guidelines, and we're going to work with the Attorney General, and we're going to work with the Grand Junction Police to come up with training that's going to improve how we do witness identification. And I'm testifying in favor of that bill. I believe it will pass. It will provide a fairer and a more effective public safety system, because if you're arresting the wrong person, then you're not actually promoting public safety either. I'm going to put in the chat a whole set of initiatives around public safety that is about building trust in law enforcement. So we are both treating people fairer as well as enhancing public safety. Those two go hand in hand. And finally, protecting our land, air, and water. Many of you have been engaged working on how we promote and support effective air quality, which is on our minds on a variety of fronts. We've had to be playing defense under the last couple of years, fighting rollbacks of the methane rule, the clean car rule, the clean power plan. Now we're going to be working constructively, proactively in how we address air quality, how we address the reality of climate change, and how we adapt to climate change. Because one of the critical challenges we have in Colorado is water. We can't deficit finance it. As one person said in an article, when you need water, only water will do. Here's the problem. With a lot more people, enough for a whole new congressional district, which is awesome, we have more demands on water. With climate change, we have less natural snowpack, we have less water. That's a challenging equation. We got to figure out how we get through it. My answer, together. Figuring out what works best for all of Colorado with the spirit of collaboration and innovation, we can find our way to manage a more resilient system of water management that also coexists with our surrounding states with whom we have legal obligations. It's going to take hard work. We're working hard at it. And we need to make sure that those who would engage in water rights speculation don't get to hijack our future, which depends on how we manage our water. So I've got a lot of work to do. And thankfully, I've got people like Linda's son to help do it, who's helping protect our land, air, and water and addressing climate change. We need to be in this as a team. I often say our democracy is a team sport. And when it comes to getting the word out, getting people engaged, I know you guys are the best of the best. And I need your help to do that, because whether it's defending our democracy, protecting the rights of citizens, improving our criminal justice system, protecting our land, air, and water, our office is doing this as part of a team with the people of Colorado. It's really an honor to do this work. And I want to leave some time for questions so I can answer whatever on your mind. Great to be with you all.
Andy, do you want to ask your question of Phil about re-election?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
In fairness to Phil.
That's right, Phil. We are extremely pleased with what you've been doing, and we hope that this is something you will consider to do in 2022 and beyond. So, question is, are you running for re-election?
Andy, that is one of the more down the middle questions I can ever get. So I appreciate starting me off with an easy one. If you go to philforcolorado.com, you will see my re-election video and my commitment that I am running for re-election. The work that I just outlined is not going to get done in the next 18 months. I want to continue doing this work and to see through projects along the lines I've mentioned. And that means I need to continue serving as your Attorney General. So yes, I'm running for re-election.
Well, we're going to do our part. As you said, it's team action. And so we're on your team.
I feel it.
Great. Rob,
Yeah.
some questions?
Phil, is there any legislation that's made its way through the current session ending in June that in the state that affects the day-to-day operation of your office? Anything that you want to highlight?
I do, Rob. I want to talk about 3 bills that I am testifying for because they're core to our agenda. The first is the one I mentioned about the witness identification. In our office, we are involved in this training of police officers, and we had guidance, and unfortunately our guidance wasn't taken seriously enough. For the case I just mentioned in Denver is a case in point. So we're working to make sure the guidance we're working on for witness identification is mandatory. And that's something I'm testifying for on Thursday. I've also testified for another bill that came out of a effort I lead called the Domestic Violence Fatality Review Board. And one of the parts of my job that I have accepted is how much trauma and tragedy I am confronted with. The shooting in Boulder is probably the top of that list, but it's unfortunately a longer list than I would like. And as you confront that trauma and tragedy, you ask, what do we learn from this? How do we avoid it in the future? Well, every year we catalog every single person who dies from domestic violence, every victim. A lot of them are kids. What we know is if you have a domestic violence perpetrator with a firearm, they're 5 to 8 times more likely to kill somebody. We also know that our protection order law that keeps firearms out of the hands of domestic violence perpetrators is riddled with loopholes. And so this law that we are pushing would fix and close those loopholes. And it's getting ready to be voted on in the House and then moved to the Senate. And the third one was just introduced, and it also is in the area of criminal justice. It's about unpaid fines that trigger a revocation of your driver's license. Sharon's nodding. I think she may know about this. It's terrible. If you are poor and you have these fines and then you lose your driver's license, you have 2 choices. You drive illegally, which is a terrible choice to put someone to, or you don't drive and maybe you lose your job, which gives you less money to pay the fines. That is the definition of a vicious cycle being perpetrated by the state. It's unjust and it doesn't achieve the goal, which the goal is to get the fines paid, but you take someone's license away, it doesn't make them pay the fines. It just puts them to that terrible choice I mentioned. So we need to fix that and end that practice, which is unduly punitive and not productive. California, my understanding, has ended that practice and got more money in unpaid fines the next year. So those are 3 that I've been putting my shoulder behind because they're all on the side of justice and improving our criminal justice system.
Thank you. Yesterday's Denver Post had a front page story about extremists operating and their history in Colorado. If you're at liberty to speak about it, are there investigations ongoing or coming out of your office to combat extremism throughout the state?
What I can say, Rob, is it is very much on our minds and weighs on our hearts that we are seeing rising hate. I do want to say, because it's been a recent episode and just a glimpse, someone in our office who opened up that she was afraid to be in downtown Denver because she's Asian and has internalized the hating that's out there. We did just announce a area that we took on people who are targeting Asians with robberies. And that type of targeting based on who someone is a reflection of the moment we're living in, where it's rising demonization and hating, and it spreads across different groups. The attack on a synagogue in San Diego was motivated by an attack on a mosque in Christchurch, New Zealand. So we're alert to this. We're training police officers on how to identify, report, and then ultimately prosecute hate crimes. There is a lot of work to do, and all of us can, again, do our part in being our best authentic selves and helping people to feel comforted and accepted no matter who they are, no matter who they love.
This is a tough one, and this is a current topic of everyone's interest, and that's qualified immunity for sworn officers. Can you comment on where it is, where it might be headed or adjusted or not in our state?
So back to my starting point about being a teacher. I've taught constitutional law before, and only in my fantasy world did I think I'd be talking as Attorney General to explain what qualified immunity is and why it's problematic. So first, why it's problematic. So Rob, you're a pro on this. You clearly are steeped in this, but a lot of people, if you ask them, what is qualified immunity? I'm not sure people can explain it. Here's the issue. It gives police officers a threshold question that ordinary defendants don't get to kind of put in the way. The threshold question is the civil right at issue, quote unquote, clearly established. The problem with that threshold question getting put in the way is you end up with this circular dynamic of, oh, this right is not yet clearly established, so it never gets clearly established. It becomes this protective shield that, again, ordinary, I'll use a fancy legal word, tortfeasors don't get. Usually you either violate someone's rights or you don't. But if you're a police officer under federal civil rights law, you get this special protection. It was meant for good purposes. It was meant to protect officers acting in good faith, but it took on a life of its own, and it's a problem. What do we do in Colorado? We got rid of this special protective doctrine, and instead we say, like any other employer, if your agent violates someone's rights, you're liable. So if you're a police department or you're a city and your employee violates someone's rights, you're liable. Now, the individual officer doesn't have to pay anything unless that officer acted in bad faith. And if they acted with a lack of good faith, to be more legally precise, they would then have to pay $25,000 or 5% of the judgment, whichever less, as a way to contribute to the wrong that they, in not good faith, caused. That's the Colorado model right now. There's a reasonable chance, I think this is what Rob is getting at, that Congress will take the Colorado model as a way to replace qualified immunity at the federal level, which would be a remarkable accomplishment that Colorado developed a framework that, by the way, your Congressman, Joe Neguse, is pushing for as part of a bipartisan negotiation. I really hope it can happen because it's the right policy and we need Congress to show that it can legislate. And unfortunately, on a range of issues from police reform to consumer rights, to privacy rights, to a whole bunch of other topics, Congress has been unable, background checks for, right to have a weapon, Congress has been unable to act, but we need Congress to act. And on this issue, there's some promise that they will.
Hey, Rob, John Varn has an interesting question there, and it somewhat relates to what Jenna Griswold was talking about. Do you see
Back-
John's question there?
Is that the
Postmaster?
joy?
At the postmaster, yeah.
Yeah.
Let's jump to that one. Sure. For everybody else's interest, the question was, does Phil and his office discern any illegality, anything that might be an opportunity for a lawsuit? It might be too late now, but about the postmaster's barriers and alleged suppression of access to voting that he just seemed to put in place and is still there.
Well, Jen and I sued him twice
that-
and won both times.
Oh, great.
So it was surreal. This happened a lot over the last 2 years. I would watch something and I would think, please don't do this. Please don't do this. I can't believe you did this. To then Jenna calling me and saying, Phil, can we sue about this? Jenna, you want to add to that?
No, that pretty much wraps it up. But we really helped Colorado and the nation. So the first lawsuit was a national lawsuit to stop the Postmaster General from doing things like removing sorting equipment for the mail ballots, from stopping overtime, things that they were trying to do structurally to impede vote by mail nationwide. And remember, we expanded vote by mail to over 83% of American voters. And in Colorado, you all know that the vast majority use vote by mail. So we won that injunction in the District of Yakima out of Washington, if I'm remembering correctly. In the second lawsuit, literally on a Friday night, I think at 8 o'clock, I called Phil and said, hey, it turns out that the post office just sent wrong information to all Colorado voters. What do you think about filing a restraining order? And we did file that. We won. They stopped sending the rest of the postcards. That was really important because I mentioned to you all that we increased tribal voting in 2 years by about 20%. And the wrong information on those postcards would have affected our friends in Southwest Colorado just because of how their mail systems work. But second, we actually approved out of my office and Phil's office together every single communication that the post office was doing after that to get out the vote. So big wins. I'm gonna guess that more will be more is untold with the post office that we'll continue to learn about in the coming years.
Easy question, Phil. Do you support the expansion of the number of justices on the federal Supreme Court?
The reason it's not an easy, I don't know if I'm facetious, Rob, is the challenge is if we do this now and we add 2 or 3, then down the road, they add more and more, and then we have a Supreme Court of 23 people. So it's very important that we keep the threat of this alive and we keep the Supreme Court honest. But this is something, it's like the break in case of true emergency. Let's see if we face the emergency. We've got some test cases this year. One is involving the Affordable Care Act. In one of those cases where I couldn't believe that the past administration they sought to challenge the Affordable Care Act as unconstitutional on a wackadoodle legal theory. I believe we're going to win that case. I believe that Chief Justice Roberts is trying to keep the Supreme Court on the rails because he knows about this threat and the just general lack of public confidence in the court. So I would give the court space to act responsibly before hitting the break in case of emergency box.
I think I asked this question when you were with us in person, Phil, and it's popped up again from another person, which is the red flag law. And just as time has gone by now with case law or just everyday practice, is it still a good asset for the state? Is it working? Is it stumbling? How's it doing?
It's working well. It's a really good question, Rob. I appreciate you asking it. One of the things we're looking at is how do we get the word out better about it? Because it's only as good as public awareness. Back to my meme, to use a word that my kids use a lot, of democracy is a team sport. I believe we need educated citizens. And one of the areas that people can be educated about is how we can be partners in public safety. If you know someone who's a significant risk to themselves or others, your law enforcement can use this law to remove a firearm that can save lives. It might save the life of the person because most people die of gun violence through suicide. And we tried really hard to get the word out that we need safe gun storage. We've done a whole public awareness campaign around that. And we need people to use Safe to Tell as a safe, anonymous place to go to when there are threats to young people because they are planning on taking their own life. We need to use all the tools we can. That includes the red flag law. It has also been upheld in the face of every challenge it's faced. We've defended the law, and it is a very valuable tool. So I'm really glad we passed it. We're going to keep getting the word out. We're going to keep defending it.
How we doing, Andy? Do I time for
I think
another
we have
question?
time for
At least one more.
one more question.
Okay,
We can just
sure.
open it up to, or we can
Okay.
just ask Phil one
Yeah,
one question that pertains to his area of expertise.
I have a good question. I think it might be yours, Andy. Phil, your office is involved with investigating the Aurora police conduct in the Elijah McClain case. Is there any update on that and just where that investigation is?
So we actually have two tracks. One track is a criminal grand jury as one is best prosecuted by the governor. Under Colorado law, there's actually literally nothing I can say about an ongoing grand jury proceeding other than it's an ongoing grand jury proceeding. On the other track, it's a civil rights case that involves the concern that there's a pattern and practice of civil rights violations by the city of Aurora. And we've gotten a lot of community input and concerns on this. And this will end in, presumably we have a report that if it validates the concerns, the city could say, we are concerned and we're gonna have a consent decree, or the city could be, let's call it very defensive and say, you gotta litigate against us. So that's ongoing as well, two separate tracks. The first one is criminal. The second one is civil rights. The second one is more about systemic behavior. The first is about individual behavior. And so we're working on both, and both those fit in the broader context of how we build trust in law enforcement. And I put in the chat for those who can see it, this blog post that talks about that overall agenda.
Okay,
That's it, Andy.
okay, wonderful. Well, we want to thank all our presenters this evening, Jenna, Dave, and Phil. And thank you for your service. It requires a lot of personal sacrifice on your part, and we're indebted to you for that service. I think one of the things that came up, at least in my mind this evening, is the concept of vigilance. You know, we all get busy with our own everyday lives, and we don't sometimes keep track of what's going on, but we know that Jenna, Dave, and Phil are watching out for us, and we appreciate that. And we're, again, very thankful for you joining us this evening. And I know we're going to hear more from you, and we're going to do our best to make sure that you're able to continue this work in the years to come. So I want to thank everyone this evening who joined us, and we'll be having another meeting sometime in June. So look for the announcements that come your way. So want to say good evening to everyone, and again, thanks for joining us. And as Phil said, may the 4th be with all of us. Good night.
Thanks for the
See you later.
presentation.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good
It
night.
was a pleasure. Good night,
everybody.
everybody.
Appreciate you all.
Good
Thank
night.
you.
Bye-bye now.
Hey, good night. Thank you.
Good night.
Good
That's
night.
anybody. Thank you. Thanks, Linda. Great introduction.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.
Andy, I'll wait for everybody to go away.
All right, I'll
Okay,
jump
Before I
off.
shut it
Andy,
down.
great job. Always a pleasure. You guys take care now.
thank you.
Thank you, Phil.
Thank you.
You wanna-
We're down to the last few here. And Andy, I will be sending out the Dave's slide deck and a bunch of other stuff.
Well, great. And we've recorded this evening. Some
Yes.
people who may not
I'm
have been able
actually-
to attend, and
I actually remembered to bring it back and start recording. I paused it at the beginning, like the first 20 minutes that we were up here until we got started. So it should be nice and clean, and I'm gonna make sure everybody knows about it and can get a copy of it if they want, but I'm gonna make it private, so they have to contact me
Okay, yeah, that.
rather
that
than just
makes-
making it a public.
Right, right. That makes good sense. Well, I think we had good attendance this evening.
It's it was fine, yeah,
Yeah, and
excellent.
I thought this was an excellent program.
Great
Having
job.
these
Very
these
good.
three speakers is phenomenal.
Great
Excellent.
job. Great job. It was great to see everyone.
Did a great
Yeah.
job. Thank you.
Thanks,
Yeah,
everybody.
thank you.
Bye.
All right,
I'll be in touch about June of running. I can't get Matt to reply to me, so I'll send out an email about that.
okay.
Okay.
Good,
Yeah.
good.
Good. All right. Again,
Good
thanks
job.
for everything, everybody.
Thank you, Andy.
It's when we all work together, we get a great show. All
Well,
right,
you do a great job. Thank you so much.
Good night,
All right.
all.
good night.
Good
Bye.
night.
Bye-bye.
Good night, Linda. Betty Sue, bye-bye. Oh, I'm shutting it down now. Want somebody on a phone call? There's Jason. Good night. End meeting for all.